The sun had already begun its slow descent across the Arizona sky, bleeding gold and crimson into the rugged mesas and jagged cliffs. Dust swirled lazily on the trail as Luke McAllister, a weary rancher with calloused hands and a weathered face, urged his tired horse forward. He had been riding since dawn, searching for stray cattle that had wandered too far from his land. The desert had a way of swallowing things whole, men, cattle, and dreams alike. Luke had learned long ago that if you didn't keep your eyes sharp, the land would take more than you were willing to give. As he reached a narrow pass between two outcroppings of stone, a sharp cry split the silence. At first he thought it was the call of a hawk echoing through the rocks, but then came the unmistakable sound of struggle, a woman's voice, raw with desperation. He pulled his reins tight, forcing his horse to stop, and listened. The sound carried again, faint but urgent. Without hesitation, Luke spurred his horse toward it. The scene opened before him in a dry arroyo. A woman, her long black hair loose and whipping in the wind, was cornered against a boulder. Two outlaws, ragged men with dirty bandanas covering. Their faces advanced on her with cruel grins. One clutched a revolver, the other a coil of rope. Luke's chest tightened. He didn't know who she was, Apache by her dress and striking features, but that didn't matter. She was outnumbered, defenseless, and in danger. The rancher didn't have time to weigh his options. He drew his Colt in one fluid motion, the metal catching the last rays of the dying sun. "Hold it right there!" His voice rang out, steady and commanding. The outlaws turned sharply. One raised his pistol, but Luke was faster. A thunderous shot cracked through the arroyo, and the man's weapon spun from his grasp, clattering across the rocks. The second outlaw lunged toward the woman with the rope, but Luke's horse surged forward, hooves pounding. In a flash, Luke swung down from the saddle, tackling the man with the force of a falling boulder. Dust flew as they wrestled. The outlaw's breath stank of whiskey, his grip iron-strong, but Luke fought with the desperation of a man who had lived too long on the edge of survival. He slammed his fist into the man's jaw, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The first outlaw scrambled for his fallen gun, but before he could raise it, Luke's revolver was already leveled at his chest. "Pick it up, and it'll be the last thing you ever do," Luke growled, his voice low, dangerous. The outlaw hesitated, eyes narrowing, then spat into the dirt. With a sharp whistle, the two men scrambled up the ridge, vanishing into the rocks like coyotes slinking back to their den. Luke kept his gun raised until the echoes of their retreat faded into silence. Breathing hard, he turned to the woman. She hadn't moved from where she stood, pressed against the boulder, eyes wide and dark as storm clouds. For a moment they regarded each other, stranger and stranger, both standing at the threshold of something neither could yet name. "You're safe now," Luke said quietly, holstering his pistol. He offered her a steady hand. "They won't trouble you again." The woman looked at his hand, then at his face. Slowly, she placed her slender fingers in his calloused palm. Her voice, when it came, was soft but resolute, touched with an accent he couldn't place exactly. "You fight with courage, white man," she said. "For this, I will not forget." And with those words, she smiled, not of relief alone, but of something deeper, as though fate had just shifted beneath their feet. Luke didn't know it yet, but in that fleeting moment, his life had changed forever. The air in the arroyo hung heavy with silence after the outlaw's retreat, broken only by the restless shifting of Luke's horse and the faint rasp of his own breathing. The Apache woman still held his hand lightly, her dark eyes fixed on him as though searching for something beyond the man she saw before her. Finally, she released him, straightening her shoulders with a proud grace that struck Luke as more regal than fragile. "You are hurt," she said, her gaze dropping to his side. Luke followed her eyes and noticed the slow crimson stains seeping through the fabric of his shirt. He had been too focused on the fight to register the gash the outlaw's knife had carved across his ribs. Now, with the adrenaline ebbing, the sting came alive, sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore. He clenched his jaw, trying not to show the pain. "I'll manage," he muttered, but the woman shook her head firmly, strands of her black hair catching the breeze. "No, you saved me. Now I must save you." Before Luke could protest, she moved, with swift efficiency, tearing a strip from her own deerskin wrap and pressing it against his wound. The gesture startled him. Her touch was gentle yet sure, hands practiced in care. He felt an unfamiliar heat rise in his chest, not from the pain, but from the closeness of her presence. "What's your name?" Luke asked, trying to distract himself from the sting. "Takala," she replied, her eyes meeting his with quiet strength. "And you are?" "Luke McAllister, rancher, few miles south of here." He managed a crooked grin. "Cattle usually give me more trouble than men with guns." Her lips curved in the faintest smile, though her hands never faltered in tending him. "Cattle do not hunt women," she said simply. When she had bound the wound as best she could, Takala gestured toward the ridge. "You cannot ride far in this state. My people are near. You will come." Luke hesitated. The thought of walking into an Apache camp, an outsider, a white rancher, and injured at that, was no small matter. The history between their worlds was heavy, written in blood and distrust. Yet, looking into Takala's eyes, he found himself nodding before his doubts could speak. They set off together, Luke leading his horse while Takala guided the way. The desert twilight deepened, shadows stretching long across the land. Though his side burned with each step, Luke couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm. The woman moved with such certainty, her figure framed against the painted sky, that he began to trust her without question. At last, the faint glow of firelight flickered ahead. A circle of lodges stood nestled in a sheltered valley, smoke rising gently into the night. Voices drifted on the air. Children's laughter, the low murmur of conversation, the steady rhythm of drums. As they entered the edge of the camp, the sounds faltered. Dozens of eyes turned toward them, suspicion and curiosity mingling in the firelight. Luke's hand twitched near his revolver out of old habit, but Takala raised hers in a gesture of peace. "He is a friend," she called in her native tongue. "He fought for me." The murmurs softened, though the stares lingered. Two young men stepped forward, tall and proud, their hands resting near their weapons. Takala spoke to them quickly, her voice calm but firm. At last they nodded and stepped aside. She led Luke to a lodge near the heart of the camp. Inside, the air was warm and scented with sage. She motioned for him to sit on a woven mat while she fetched water and herbs. As she knelt beside him once, more grinding leaves into a poultice, Luke felt a weight settle over him. Not the pain of his wound, but the awareness that he had crossed into another world. He was a stranger here, bound by nothing but the gratitude of one woman whose life he had saved. Yet that bond, fragile though it seemed, felt stronger than iron. Takala pressed the poultice to his side, her expression softening for the first time. "Rest now," she said. "In my mother's lodge you are safe." And for the first time in years, Luke allowed himself to believe it might be. Morning broke with the scent of smoke and the chatter of voices outside the lodge. Luke stirred on the woven mat where Takala had left him, his side still aching but no longer bleeding. He blinked against the slivers of sunlight that filtered through the lodge's seams. For a brief moment, he forgot where he was, until he heard the low murmur of a language not his own and the unmistakable weight of silence that followed when strangers passed too close. He sat up slowly, wincing at the pull of his wound. His revolver rested on the floor near his boots, untouched. The fact that it remained there surprised him. He hadn't expected such trust, or perhaps it wasn't trust at all. Perhaps they had simply left it as a reminder of how out of place he was here. Takala appeared then, pushing back the flap of the lodge. She carried a small bowl of broth, fragrant with herbs and wild roots. "You are awake," she said, her voice soft but watchful. "Eat. It will give you strength." Luke took the bowl gratefully, though his stomach tightened at the realization that the village had surely learned of his presence. "Your people don't seem too pleased to see me," he said, attempting a half-smile. Takala's eyes flickered, though she did not deny it. "They remember much," she answered simply. "Too much blood between your world and mine. They see a white rancher with a gun, not the man who saved me." Her honesty cut through him sharper than the outlaw's knife. He set the empty bowl aside, meeting her gaze. "And what do you see?" For the first time, her expression softened fully, a quiet warmth in her dark eyes. "I see the truth," she said. "That is enough. For me." But it was not enough for the village. When Luke stepped outside later, leaning heavily against his horse for balance, all eyes turned toward him. Women paused at their work, children froze mid-laugh, and warriors watched with unreadable expressions. Conversations hushed as he passed, only to rise again in whispers that carried just beyond his understanding. Luke felt the weight of every stare. He had known suspicion before. Neighbors who doubted his ability to hold land alone, men in saloons who measured him with their eyes, but this was different. This was a wall of history he could not climb with words alone. Two boys darted close, their curiosity overcoming their caution. One of them, no more than 10, pointed at Luke's broad hat and laughed before being whisked away by his mother's firm hand. Luke chuckled under his breath, though the sound held little humor. Later that day, Takala brought him to the council fire. Her mother, an older woman with silver streaks in her hair and eyes sharp as flint, sat among the elders. She studied Luke. In silence, her expression unreadable, before finally speaking in her native tongue. Takala translated, "She says you are a man who fights with courage. But courage alone is not trust. Trust must be earned." Luke inclined his head, accepting the truth of it. "Then I'll earn it," he said simply. The elders murmured among themselves. Some looked skeptical, others merely thoughtful, but Takala's mother gave a single nod, as though she saw something in him worth considering. That night, as the village gathered around the fire, Luke sat on the edges of the circle. He watched the dances, the songs, the laughter of a people bound by traditions older than anything he had ever known. He felt the distance between himself and them keenly, yet he also felt the faint tug of something new, like a door cracked open, waiting for him to step through. And when his eyes strayed to Takala across the firelight, watching him with that same small, knowing smile, he wondered if she already knew he would. The days that followed moved with a rhythm Luke had never known. Ranch life had always been measured by the rising sun and the labor it demanded, mending fences, driving cattle, chasing strays across unforgiving land. But here, in Takala's village, time seemed to move by quieter markers. The smoke curling from lodge fires, the laughter of children splashing in the stream, the steady beat of drums echoing at dusk. Luke was still an outsider. He felt it in every guarded glance cast his way. Yet, each day, that wall of suspicion seemed to thin ever so slightly. Some of the men nodded curtly when he passed. The children lingered longer before running off, and the women no longer hushed their voices when he drew near. And at the heart of that change was Takala. She visited him often, checking his wound with patient care, bringing poultices that smelled of sage and pine, and speaking with him in quiet moments when the world outside the lodge seemed far away. Luke had never known a woman like her, proud, gentle, and unflinching in her honesty. She asked him questions, not out of idle curiosity, but as though every answer mattered. "Why do you live alone on your land?" she asked one evening as she sat grinding herbs beside him. The firelight painted her features in soft gold, highlighting the strength in her eyes. Luke leaned back against the wooden frame of the lodge, his hat resting on his knee. "Guess I never saw the need for more. Ranch keeps me busy enough. Besides, life has a way of taking people from you. Hard to lose. What you never had?" Takala paused, studying him with a stillness that made him uneasy. "But it is harder still," she said softly, "to walk a road with no one beside you." The words struck deeper than he cared to admit. For years, Luke had buried himself in work, convincing himself he needed nothing else. But sitting here, with her voice like a steady wind against the silence he had carried too long, he realized just how heavy that silence had been. Over the next days, their bond deepened in small, unspoken ways. She showed him where the stream curved through a hidden grove, its water cold and clear enough to numb his hand. He helped her carry baskets of roots and wood, ignoring the sting in his side as she teased him lightly for moving slower than an old man. He told her stories of the ranch, of stubborn bulls that broke fences and calves that wandered into rivers, stories that made her laugh in a way that startled him, as though joy had caught her by surprise. One evening, as the village gathered, for a feast, Luke found himself standing apart, watching the firelight dance across the faces of people who belonged to each other in a way he had never belonged anywhere. Then Takala appeared beside him, her arm brushing against his. "You stand like a tree with no roots," she said, her eyes glimmering in the fire's glow. "Maybe I've just been waiting for the right ground," Luke answered before he could think. Her smile came slow, warm, and knowing. For a heartbeat, the noise of the feast faded, leaving only the weight of her gaze on his. Something unspoken passed between them, something fragile, dangerous, and undeniable. When the night ended, and Luke returned to the lodge alone, he lay, awake, staring at the roof above him, his chest heavy with a truth he could no longer ignore. He had come here by chance, through a fight he hadn't sought, but what was growing between him and Takala no longer felt like chance. It felt like destiny. And though he didn't yet know what it meant, he knew one thing for certain. He wanted more. The desert wind had softened that evening, carrying with it the faint perfume of mesquite blossoms. Luke sat outside the lodge, mending his saddle straps with clumsy stitches. He had offered to help with chores in the village, but most still eyed him warily, and so Takala had suggested he keep his hands busy with what he knew best. She appeared from the shadows then, her figure graceful against the fading light. There was something different in her step, a quiet anticipation that Luke noticed immediately. Beside her walked a young woman, tall, slender, and strikingly beautiful, with the same dark, proud eyes as Takala. Yet where Takala carried the weight of years and wisdom, this one radiated the fire of youth, her gaze sharp and unflinching as it fell upon Luke. "Luke," Takala said softly, "this is my daughter, Ayoka." Luke rose to his feet out of respect, brushing the dust from his trousers. The girl studied him without a word, her arms folded loosely across her chest. She was younger than he expected, perhaps 19, maybe 20, but there was nothing childish in the way she held herself. Her posture was proud, her expression thoughtful, as if she were already weighing the stranger before her. "Ayoka," Takala continued, her smile warm but steady. "This is the man who saved my life." The girl tilted her head, her eyes narrowing just slightly. Then, to Luke's surprise, she spoke in clear English, her voice smooth yet firm. "My mother speaks of you with great respect, but respect must be earned, not borrowed." Luke blinked, caught between admiration and discomfort. "I reckon that's fair," he said, his voice even. "I didn't come here looking for thanks, just did what was right." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Then Ayoka's lips curved into the faintest smile, a smile that mirrored her mother's. "Perhaps," she said simply, and stepped past him into the lodge. Takala lingered at Luke's side, her eyes shining with something he couldn't quite read. Pride, perhaps. Or maybe something deeper. Something she wasn't ready to put into words. "She is strong," Takala murmured, watching her daughter disappear inside. "Strong enough to walk beside a man without bending to him?" Luke nodded slowly. "She looks it." The conversation ended there, but the thought of the girl lingered in his mind throughout the night. The next day, Ayoka's presence was everywhere. She moved through the village with ease, helping the elders, laughing with the children, carrying water with a balance that made the task look effortless. Luke noticed how the others respected her, how her voice seemed to carry weight far beyond her years. She was not merely Takala's daughter, she was a woman already carving her place among her people, and she noticed him too. He caught her watching him once as he mended a fence post near the edge of the camp. Another time, she passed him a basket of berries without a word, her eyes lingering on his face just long enough to unsettle him. That evening, as the sun sank low, Takala returned to the lodge with both her daughter and Luke present. She set down a bowl of stew between them, then looked from one to the other with a smile that was more than motherly. It was deliberate, purposeful. "My daughter is ready to choose her path," Takala said quietly, "and I see clearly now. She is perfect for the man who saved me." Luke's breath caught. Ayoka's eyes widened, but she did not protest. Instead, she looked at him steadily, as though measuring the weight of her mother's words against the stirrings of her own heart. Luke felt the world tilt beneath him. He had come to this place a stranger, wounded and unwanted. Now, standing between mother and daughter, he realized he was being offered something far greater than gratitude, and it terrified him as much as it stirred a longing he hadn't felt in years. The lodge was quiet except for the faint crackle of the fire. Takala's words hung in the air like a hawk circling overhead, sharp, heavy, impossible to ignore. "My daughter is perfect for the man who saved me." Luke stood frozen, his hand hovering near the bowl of stew he hadn't yet touched. He had faced outlaws, weathered storms, and stood nose to nose with bulls twice his size. But nothing had struck him so hard as the calm certainty in Takala's voice. Ayoka lowered her gaze for a heartbeat, her fingers tightening around the hem of her dress. Then, slowly, she lifted her head and met his eyes with quiet steadiness. She did not look angry, nor embarrassed, but there was a question in her dark gaze, as though she, too, was weighing whether fate was playing a cruel joke or offering a gift neither had expected. Luke cleared his throat, searching for words that refused to come. "Ma'am, Takala, He ran a hand over the back of his neck, the heat of the fire nothing compared to the warmth creeping up his skin. "That's a mighty generous thing to say, but marriage? I wasn't—" He stopped himself, realizing that anything he said might cut where he didn't intend. Takala's smile remained, but it was not soft. It was the smile of a woman who had seen many seasons and trusted her instincts without fear. "You saved me when others would have turned away. You stand with honor. My daughter deserves a man who will fight for her, protect her, and walk beside her with strength. You are that man." The bluntness of her words made Luke shift uncomfortably. "With respect," he said carefully, "your people don't even trust me. Half the camp still looks at me like I'm bound to draw my gun any second. How could I be a husband here, among folks who don't want me?" Takala's eyes glinted with firelight. "Trust can be earned, But love, destiny, those are rare. When they come, they must not be wasted. Ayoka finally spoke then, her voice even, yet edged with steel. Mother, you speak boldly. She looked at Luke again, this time not as a stranger, but as if she were daring him to rise or fall beneath her gaze. Do you seek me, rancher? Or do you fear what my mother sees? Luke's chest tightened. The honesty of her question hit him square, leaving no room for evasion. He swallowed hard, his voice low when he answered. Truth is, I don't know what I seek anymore. I came here broken and bloodied, just trying to stay alive. But meeting you, meeting both of you, it's got me wondering if there's more to life than mending fences and counting cattle. For a moment, silence fell again. The fire popped, sending a thin stream of sparks upward. Takala leaned back, satisfied. The man does not lie. That is good. But the moment did not end there. Outside the lodge, voices stirred. Word of Takala's declaration had spread quickly, as all things did in the village. Soon, shadows moved past the lodge flap, whispers rising, sharper now. Luke caught fragments of words he couldn't understand, though their tone was clear. Shock, disapproval, disbelief. Ayoka straightened, her jaw tightening. They will not accept this easily, she said. Luke clenched his fists, feeling the walls close in. He had fought hard for his land, for his life, for every scrap of respect he'd earned among his own people. But here he was one man, against a whole world. And yet, when his eyes met Ayoka's across the fire, he felt the faintest spark of courage kindle in his chest, the kind that whispered some things were worth the fight. That night, Luke lay awake in Takala's lodge, staring at the woven patterns above him, their shadows trembling in the fire's dying glow. Sleep refused to come. His body begged for rest, but his mind churned with a storm fiercer than any he had faced on the open range. Marriage. The word itself struck him like a hammer. He had never thought much about it. Life on the ranch was hard, lonely, and unforgiving. He had buried enough hopes beneath the dry Arizona soil to know better than to dream of a family, a wife, children. The land took too much from a man to leave room for such comforts. Or so he had convinced himself. And yet, Takala's words had cracked open something he had long buried. He remembered the way Ayoka had looked at him, proud, unafraid, questioning. Not a girl offered like cattle at market, but a woman who would not bend easily to any man, even if she accepted him. Her beauty was undeniable, but it wasn't her face that unsettled him. It was her fire. The thought of walking beside her stirred, a yearning in him that he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. But with that yearning came fear. He thought of the tribe's eyes, hard and mistrustful, the whispers that followed his every step. He was a rancher, a white man whose kind had clashed with hers for generations. Could he really stand among them as one of their own? Could he give Ayoka a life worth living when his own was nothing more than dust, cattle, and fences? Luke pressed, a hand to his side, feeling the rough bandage beneath his shirt. He owed Takala his recovery, perhaps his life. He owed her gratitude, respect, maybe even friendship. But marriage? That was more than debt. It was a promise that stretched into forever. He closed his eyes, trying to silence the storm within him. But then he heard the faint sound of movement outside the lodge. He sat up slowly, hand instinctively reaching for the revolver by his boots. The flap stirred, and a shadow slipped in. It was Ayoka. She stepped quietly, her face lit by the faint glow of the fire. Luke rose halfway, uncertain whether to speak, but she lifted a hand, silencing him. "My mother's words trouble you," she said softly. Luke let out a low, humorless laugh. That obvious? Her eyes softened, though her posture remained proud. You are a man torn between two worlds. I see it. But do not mistake this. My mother may speak boldly, but I am not a prize to be given. I choose for myself. Her words struck him with unexpected relief. Then what do you choose? He asked quietly. Ayoka's gaze held his, steady and unflinching. I choose truth. If your heart is only kindness for saving my mother, then let it end there. But if there is more, if your spirit reaches toward mine as mine begins to reach toward yours, then do not fear it. Luke's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to tell her that something in him already leaned toward her, that the thought of riding back to his ranch alone suddenly felt emptier than ever before. But the words tangled in his chest. Ayoka must have seen the conflict. In his silence, for she gave a small nod. Do not answer now. The path will test you soon enough. Then we will both know the truth. And with that, she slipped out of the lodge as quietly as she had entered, leaving Luke staring at the flames until dawn, torn between fear and a strange, dangerous hope. The village gathered at dawn, the air sharp with the chill of night still, clinging to the desert. A council fire burned low in the center, its smoke curling into a sky just beginning to blush with morning light. Word had spread of Takala's bold declaration, and now every voice, every stare weighed heavy upon Luke. He stood a few paces behind Takala, the eyes of the tribe prickling against his back. He could hear the low murmur of their doubts, their warnings. Some looked at him with suspicion, others with open disdain. He was an intruder in their world, and now he was caught in the middle of a matter far greater than himself. Takala stood, tall before the council, her chin lifted, her voice strong. This man fought for me when death was near. His courage is not the courage of a thief or a coward. I say he is worthy of my daughter. The words drew another wave of murmurs. Some scoffed openly, others nodded in quiet thought. But all eyes turned toward Ayoka, who sat among the women, her face calm yet unreadable. The eldest of the council, his hair long and white as desert sage, raised his hand for silence. His voice was low, deep, carrying the weight of years. It is not only a mother's word that matters. The woman must speak for herself. A hush fell. All eyes went to Ayoka. Slowly she rose. The firelight caught her features, painting them in shades of gold and shadow. She walked into the circle, her steps deliberate, her presence commanding despite her youth. When she stopped, her gaze swept the faces around her before settling on Luke. Her eyes held him, steady, unwavering. Then she spoke. My mother is proud. Her words are strong. But they are not my chains. I choose for myself. Luke felt his chest tighten. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath until now. Ayoka turned from him to face the council. This man is not of our blood. He does not walk our ways. His hands smell of cattle and iron. But... She paused, her voice softening just slightly. He did not turn from danger. He did not seek reward. And when I looked into his eyes, I did not see greed or cruelty. I saw truth. The crowd stirred again, some voices rising in protest, others murmuring in agreement. Ayoka lifted her chin. If there is a path between his world and mine, I will walk it. I will not be given. I will not be traded. I will choose. Her eyes flicked back to Luke, and for the first time, a spark of warmth touched her proud expression. And I choose to see if his spirit is strong enough to walk beside me. The elder nodded solemnly, his expression unreadable. Then it is settled. The man has been chosen, but words are not enough. A test must come. Luke's stomach nodded. He didn't know what kind of test the old man spoke of, But the way the villagers murmured told him it would not be easy. Ayoka did not falter. She looked at Luke, her gaze fierce and unyielding. "This is the way. If you are true, you will prove it, not only to me, but to my people." Luke met her eyes, his pulse hammering. For the first time since Takala's shocking proposal, he felt the storm inside him begin to settle. There was fear, yes, but also something stronger rising beneath it, a determination he hadn't felt in years. He gave a single nod. "Then, I'll prove it." And as the tribe broke into excited whispers, Ayoka's expression softened just enough for him to see the flicker of hope she had kept hidden. The trial came sooner than Luke expected. That night, as the council fire burned high and the people gathered in a circle, the elder spoke. His voice was rough as stone, but it carried power that silenced every whisper. "This man has stepped into our world, and the daughter of Takala has spoken her choice. But words are wind unless proven by fire. If he would walk among us, he must show his heart is strong. The trial begins now." Luke's stomach tightened as the elder gestured toward the desert beyond the camp. Shadows flickered against the horizon, and soon a group of young warriors brought forward 3 wild horses they had driven down from the ridges. The animals snorted, their nostrils flaring, eyes rolling with untamed fury. A ripple of approval swept through the crowd. Luke understood. A horse unbroken was a test of strength, patience, and courage. If he could master one, perhaps he could master himself enough to earn their trust. But before he could step forward, a shout cut through the night. "Raiders!" The warning spread like fire in dry grass. From the hills came the pounding of hooves, the war cries of men who meant blood. A band of desperados, outlaws and renegades who preyed on villages like this one, rushed toward the camp. Chaos erupted. Women gathered children, pulling them toward safety. Warriors snatched bows, lances, and rifles, forming a wall between the raiders and their people. Takala was already shouting orders, her voice carrying clear and fierce through the storm. And Luke? Instinct took him before thought. He grabbed his revolver and leapt to his horse, his wound aching but forgotten. The raiders poured into the edge of the camp, firing wildly, their gunshots shattering the night. Luke fired back, dropping one from the saddle. Another came charging at him with a knife raised high, but Luke swung his rifle like a club, knocking the man sprawling. In the chaos, he caught sight of Ayoka. She stood at the front line beside the warriors, bow taut, eyes blazing. She loosed an arrow that struck true, felling a raider before he could reach the women fleeing to safety. For a moment, their eyes met across the battlefield, hers fierce and unyielding, his burning with a fire he hadn't known he carried. The fight raged on. Luke rode hard into the fray, shoulder to shoulder with Apache warriors. At first, some looked at him with surprise, even doubt, but when they saw the precision of his shots, the steadiness of his courage, something shifted. For every man he struck down, their shouts grew louder, fiercer, as if his courage fed their own. By the time the last of the raiders fled back into the desert, the camp was scarred but standing. Smoke rose from smoldering fires, the ground littered with the wounded and the fallen. But the people were alive, their village defended. Luke dismounted slowly, his chest heaving, his revolver empty. He wiped the blood and dust from his face, his eyes searching until they found Ayoka. She approached him, her bow still in hand, her expression unreadable at first. Then, in front of the entire village, she reached out and touched his arm. "You stood with us," she said, her voice steady but softer than he had ever heard it. "Not as a stranger, not as a rancher, as one of us." The elder stepped forward, his gaze heavy on Luke. The trial was given. Fate brought another. And he has not failed. The crowd murmured, this time not with suspicion, but with something different. acceptance. Luke looked around at the faces illuminated by the dying flames. For the first time since he had stumbled into this world, he did not feel the weight of being an outsider. He felt instead the beginning of belonging, and when Ayoka's hand lingered on his arm, her dark eyes meeting his with quiet certainty, he knew the trial had proven more than courage. It had proven his heart. The desert dawn broke soft and golden, the air washed clean after the storm of battle. Smoke still lingered in the air, but it carried not fear, only the memory of courage. The raiders had been driven off, and though the village bore its scars, its heart still beat strong. Luke stood at the edge of the council fire, his hat in his hands, his clothes still marked with dust and blood. He had fought many battles before, against outlaws, against the land, against loneliness itself, but never had a fight left him so changed. When the drums began, low and steady, he knew this day was not his alone. The people gathered in a wide circle, their faces solemn, their voices hushed. Children sat at their mothers' sides, warriors stood tall with lances in hand, and the elders formed a line near the fire. Takala stood in their midst, her eyes shining with quiet pride. Ayoka stepped forward. She was dressed in a robe of soft doeskin, embroidered with beads that caught the light of the rising sun. Her hair, long and black, was braided with feathers, each one a symbol of strength and spirit. She walked with her head high, her steps deliberate, as though the earth itself moved in time with her. Luke's heart pounded as she came to stand before him. In her eyes he saw no hesitation, no doubt, only the certainty of a choice she had already made. The elder raised his hands, and the drums stilled. His voice carried over the circle, deep and resonant. This man has stood in the fire of trial. He has fought not for himself, but for those beside him. He has shown courage, not only of the body, but of the heart. And the daughter of Takala has chosen him. Today we bind not only two souls, but two worlds. A murmur of approval swept through the crowd. Luke swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing on him. He had never been a man for speeches, but now, looking at Ayoka, words rose unbidden. "I came here a stranger," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I didn't expect to find anything but trouble, but I found more than I ever deserved. I don't promise riches or an easy road. What I promise is to fight beside you, to stand when others would fall, and to never turn away from you, no matter the storm." Ayoka's eyes softened, and for the first time, a smile broke fully across her face. When she spoke, her words were clear and strong. "I choose you, Luke McAllister, not because my mother speaks it, not because my people accept it, but because I see truth in you, and truth is stronger than fear." The elder nodded, lifting a strip of braided leather, adorned with beads and feathers. He bound their hands together, palm to palm, his voice rising. "From this day, two paths walk as one. Where he goes, she follows. Where she stands, he stands. May the Great Spirit bless their union." The circle erupted in cheers and song. Drums thundered, voices rose in harmony, and the air vibrated with life. Luke turned to Ayoka, his hand still bound to hers. For a moment the noise faded, leaving only the warmth of her touch, the brightness of her eyes. He leaned close, his voice low, meant only for her. "I reckon I've found my home after all." She squeezed his hand, her smile soft and sure. "Not found, Luke, chosen." And as the sun rose higher, casting light across the village, Luke McAllister, once a weary rancher with nothing but dust and fences, stood reborn, not as a stranger, not as an outsider, but as a husband, a protector, and a man whose kindness had led him to a destiny he never could have imagined. The Apache woman smiled from the crowd, pride in her eyes, as her daughter's hand rested in the man who had saved her. The bond was sealed.